In this video, we're going to take a look at doing constraints in sketches. I know some people don't like it. It is a little bit of a necessary evil, although you can do modeling, especially pads and pockets, without constraining. I don't recommend it because strange things can happen sometimes if you don't constrain things. So what I wanted to do was just go through some basics that I use to constrain things. I'm not saying I'm the best or this is the only way to do constraining, but I just wanted to share how I approach constraining so that you can see how you can constrain models in a fairly uniform and progressive kind of way. So before we start that, let me show you the version I'm using. I just updated to the latest build, which is version 0.19, and it is revision number 23546. So the first thing I want to do, I'm just going to draw a shape, and the way I do sketching is I rough out the shape that I want, then I constrain that shape, and then I set up my dimensions. So in this case, it's just going to be a random shape. And I'm going to set this shape up just to give you an idea of how I approach constraining shapes. I'm going to stick with some fairly easy shapes here just to show you how I would go about constraining it and give you an idea of how to approach a sketch to get that constraint to work. Now in this one, I'm actually not going to use any radii. And I'm doing that on purpose because next one I'm going to show you a sketch that is all radii, and I'll show you how I go about constraining that too. So the first thing I do is I look for geometric constraints that I wanted to be in this part. So in this case, this particular piece here should be a vertical, but the way I drew it, the system didn't recognize that. Normally they would constrain it as a vertical if you get it roughly vertical. But if you're a ways off, that won't happen. So I'm going to select that one and give it a vertical constraint. And I'm going to select that one and give that a vertical constraint too. And these two here, I meant to be horizontal. So I'm going to select those, make them horizontal. So I'm doing all this before I start dimensioning because I want to make sure I've got all my geometry right first. So this also should be vertical. And then the next thing I look for is symmetry. So I may want to make something symmetrical. I usually am very careful as to where I place my sketch around the coordinate system. The reason I do that is because 9 times out of 10, I'm going to machine this. And if I do that, in this case, if my center point is here, when I go into the path workbench, I know I can set everything up from the center of the job. If I wanted it to be in the corner, I'd move everything so that my sketch was based around the corner point, and then I'd put everything up in this quadrant here. But for where I want this sketch, that is perfectly good. Now, one thing I wanted to show you is if you want symmetry, but you don't necessarily want it around this center point, you can still create symmetry around any line. So I'm going to use a construction line. It came out blue. And I'm going to use that construction line to set up symmetry. So I'm going to say that point, and that line are symmetrical. Now notice I select the 2 points that I want to be symmetrical around the line, which I select last before I hit that symmetry guy. So now these 2 points are symmetrical around this line. So it's going to be important that we describe where that line is so we know where the symmetry should lay. Then what I like to do is I look at the part in terms of any other symmetries or anything else that should be in line. So if this line should be in line with this line, you can select this point at this point and give them a vertical constraint, and now they're always going to be in line together. So that's all set. And then I look at overall dimensions. So what's important to me from a design perspective? What am I designing? What's going to fit into what? So many times the outside dimensions are going to be something that you care about. So I'm going to care about those, and I'm going to Just going to make sure I haven't got anything selected. I'm going to select those 2 points and give that a dimension. So that's my overall length. And then I'm going to do the same for my height. So I'm going to pick this guy, and that's going to be my overall height. Now, when I'm building this sketch, when I'm constraining this sketch, I'm wary of how I define things as to how they're going to fit. So if, for instance, to me, the important part is this piece and this dimension, and this angle is wherever it falls, then I won't constrain the angle. I'll constrain the length here, and that will fix that angle. So if I have a distance between here, and I have a point here and a point here, the angle has to be what it is. If the angle is important, I'm going to constrain the angle. So I'm going to show you both ways. I'm going to constrain this one as an angle. So again, just an angular constraint. Just select the 2 lines and angular constraint. I just try and put my dimensions somewhere where you can see them. We're not doing this is not drafting. This is just constraining. So I don't need to do it so it looks pretty. I need to do it so I can see what's dimensioned already. So I've already done this angle. Now in an angle, you need to know where those points are going to be to fully constrain it. So we'll see that in a second here. One thing I do want to show you is the under constrained sketch with 12 degrees of freedom. If you click this 12 degrees, it's going to show you all the points that are not constrained. So it gives me a good idea of what's not constrained and what I need to work on. So what I'm going to do is I am going to work through each of these unconstrained points. Now, one thing to remember is when these are selected now, if I start doing something else, it's going to complain that I already have too many things selected. So you left mouse click off of any constraints, and that will connect you up. So as I said, you left mouse click. So if I do that again, 12 degrees of freedom of unconstrained points. So they're 12 degrees of freedom. Then I'm going to left click my mouse button and it will unselect them. So you see they're all unselected. Now I'm going to, because I've made this point and this point symmetrical around this line, I'm going to constrain this line. So I'm going to do that around the center point. You have to constrain at least something to the center point or in some way to this coordinate system. Otherwise, this will continue to float in the air. So you need to have something. It doesn't have to be this line. It could be anything. But I'm actually going to choose that line. So I'm going to go from there to there. Give that a height. And remember, I'm not worried about what the height is for now. What I'm worried about is that I have it constrained, and I want it to be constrained the way I'm constraining it. The dimensions can come later. So I'm going to select that center point and that end point, and I'm going to give that a dimension the other direction. And so now I have that end point nicely constrained, and I'm going to need to give that a length as well to constrain the other end point. So in this newer version, as I'm constraining it, it changes the color slightly to give you an idea that you're constrained. So that's new in this version. It certainly wasn't in the version I was using before this. So I guess that's something that's a good thing to have in this newer version. It actually looks a little easier to get to these constraints. So I've got 9 degrees of freedom now. I can see where they are. I need to give some attention to how I'm going to dimension the rest of this part. So let's have a look. We have an overall dimension. We have an angle. So we need at least 2 more of these parts dimensions. So I'm going to say the important part is going to be that. And an important part is going to be this. So now we're down to 7 degrees of freedom. And if you're not sure where your degrees of freedom are, you can actually pick a line and start moving it. And you'll see that everything is moving around at the moment. So we've definitely got some issues with our freedom here. And this dimension and this dimension are not necessarily the same, so I'm going to dimension that line as well as an important part. You can see they're actually not the same because I didn't align this and this, and I did that intentionally. I didn't want to do that. So then we haven't aligned yet this point and this point, and I think we will. Those are going to be those vertical lines. We're down to 5 degrees of freedom, and once more, if we move everything, you can see that everything is moving. Notice this part can't move around here because I've constrained this line and I have these symmetrical lines here. I do have a dimension for here, but this piece here is floating in the air at the moment, so I'm going to give it a dimension. And remember, I have the overall dimension for that, so I have from here to here is that overall dimension. So I only need to dimension either this part or this part, and that should lock this in that direction. So let's give that dimension. And in doing so, I always just move my dimensions so that they're sort of tidy and logical. And now if I grab this line, you should see, although the whole thing can move, this is not all floating up and down along this side. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to dimension this height, and that will give me a distance that that end needs to be. So that should stop that end moving around so much. And then I'm going to give this a dimension. And now I've only got 1 degree of freedom, so we're pretty close to having this done. If we give that a move, so we can see that our degree of freedom is in the XY plane. So we need to lock something up. We can either lock the end of this to that, or we could lock one of these points to the center point. So let's see what it tells us is not locked. So I think a good one for us would be to go from this center point out to this edge. Oh, I nearly fell into my own trap. Let me show you what happens if we do this. So you see this, the degrees of freedom. I now have a whole bunch selected. If I try to do that, it's going to error and say select exactly 1 line or 2 points because they're all selected. So I got a left button there, click that guy, give that a dimension, and we are fully constrained. And so as I said, it could have been any point. It really was just to lock it in the XY position. So if I grab hold of it now, I shouldn't be able to move it anywhere. Everything is constrained, and I can modify those dimensions to move these things around. You have to choose what you think is the important parts for your design to work, not how to constrain, but how to make sure that if you need to modify it, for instance, if I want this to fit a little tighter than it is now, I should be able to make that 50, and we should be able to make that a little smaller. And it's locked in because of the way I dimension it. So what moves is going to be based on how I dimensioned it. So that's one way to do it. It's a design intent kind of approach. I'm looking at the important things for me, and I'm moving it around based on that design intent. So hopefully that helps. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll try and respond to them if you have them. Okay, so another sketch. I just created a new sketch. I kept the old one, but I just created a new one in a different body, just to show you another way to constrain things. Oh, one thing I wanted to show you quick. This is my favorite constraint, is if I'm doing a box like this, I will hit this corner, the center point, and hit symmetry. That means my box is now symmetrical around this center point. Then I'll hit this side and hit equal. So now it's truly a square. And then to constrain it, all I need to do is dimension one side, and the box is fully constrained. So just to give you an idea, something simple like that, you can constrain something with just literally one dimension. So just wanted to show you that. Now I'm going to get rid of that, and we're going to create something with some radii and do some dimension in there. So I'm going to create a random shape with some radii. Oh, looks like we're getting a cloud. And again, it's just to show you, how the sketch looks. I went black because I did a selection of everything, so there's nothing to worry about. It is a white line sketch, perfectly normal sketch. So now if I want to, so to constrain this shape, it's kind of a weird shape, but it's just a bunch of radii, nothing to be concerned about. What I usually do, let's do this for good measure. Let's pop a circle in here. So what I do when I'm constraining, if I'm constraining a circle, I'm going to use the diameter. If I constrain a radius, I'm going to use the radius version. I'm going to show you those two right now. One other thing I wanted to tell you is, so at the moment it's drawing a circle. If I want to get rid of that, I just right click and that takes off that drawing the circle part. Okay, so here in the drop down you have constrained radius or constrained diameter. So I'm going to constrain a diameter. It's going to be that guy. So because what I'm concerned about is the diameter, so I constrain a diameter. In these guys, I'm concerned about the radius, so I'm going to constrain a radius. And now you can go ahead and put the constraints on for each one. But the first thing you want to do is to figure out where those constraints are going to start and end. So what I normally do is I'll dimension off that center point, and I'll give that a dimension in the X and the Y direction. So I'm going to do that for both of these. And that fully constrains that circle because I know exactly where it is. So that's not going to move if I try to move it. But if I try and move this, you see everything else is going to move around it. So that's how you constrain a diameter, is you just need to X and Y the center point and the dimension for the diameter. Now, if that were on this line, we wouldn't have to hit an X because X is 0 if you're on the lines of the coordinate system. Okay, so I'm going to now dimension to this center point, and the reason I didn't put the radius on all of them is it's going to create all these lines and all these center points. It's going to get messy, so I don't want to do that. I want to do them slowly, one at a time, keep it nice and clear so I can figure out what exactly I'm doing here. So I'm going to do that. Same thing for this guy. So I'm just dimensioning from the center to where its radius is, and I've dimensioned its radius. Now the only thing it doesn't know is its start and end point. So what we got to do is we're going to have to somehow get it to understand that start and end point. So we'll continue with dimensioning our radii, and we got that one, and now I'm going to hit that point and that point with a horizontal, and I'm going to hit that point and that point with a vertical. And now I'm just going to move my cloud up a little bit. So we have that one and that one where we've dimensioned. And now we're going to dimension this one. So we have the radius. Again, we're just going to go off our center point. So we're going to hit that point and that point with that dimension. Say okay, and that point with that dimension. And now I have this one is dimensioned, and then I'm going to do this one. So again, go up here to my radius and say okay. Then I'm going to hit this point and this point with a dimension. this point and this point with a dimension. Just put that one out there just so I can see where it is. And then I need to do this one. I'm going to do this one with the same stuff. So here's my center point. I'm going to do my X and my Y dimensions. And there we have it. There's a constrained cloud. So all I've done is dimension each radius and each center. And because we have the radius and the center, then we know where they intersect. So I have a complete constrained cloud full of radii. There's really nothing but radii in that picture. So it just shows you how you can constrain those radii. Watching. I appreciate you taking the time. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like, and if you want to see more, please subscribe. Thanks again. Happy New Year.